Hi, everybody. We're going to get started talking about everybody's character. And in this particular um, segment of the assignment, what you were doing was adding a background and some text. We're going to talk about the background and text today, of course, but we'll also continue to talk about the character and what we can do to make it more, you know, just bring it to life a little bit more, anything we can do. But I would say that primarily um, at this stage, finding a good background is actually, it takes a little bit of playing around and experimenting. Um, so uh, don't be surprised if you have to keep playing around to find a good one. I find that it's really the most important part at this phase. There's a number of reasons. So actually, I brought the examples. You've probably looked at these examples before. I've had them posted to the classroom, but I thought we would just look at them. Now, these are examples that are from week 5, like the very end of class. So everything has been really, you know, resolved at this point. So just keep that in mind that your particular characters at this point do not have to look as polished as this. But one of the things that we can really learn from these particular designs is just how simple the background really needs to become in order for the character to look like a character to stand out. In general, like when we call something a background, we call it a background because it is like a backdrop or a background or a negative space where there's not usually as much going on. And that's true for any design you really make, is that you always want to think of the foreground, which is what you want people to be, seeing as the focal point, and then, the background, which is where is your kind of, it's just supposed to be secondary. But I think it's even more important in this particular type of project, I've learned, because the character itself is made out of objects that you're putting together. And each of those objects becomes a character, which, we want it to become a character and look like a character, but it's still each of those objects still looks like one of the objects. Like these still look like chili peppers and orange slices and a little lettuce leaf. So it becomes more important for the background to be simple, really simple, because of the fact that these are all objects. And if you put them on something that's like kind of complicated or a little bit busy, or what happens is that the character starts just blending into the background. It becomes a group of objects. We can't see it clearly as being a character, like a unified um, character anymore. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important, I have found. Um, okay, some things to keep in mind with the background is that you can have objects, like this one has a little apple here, but notice how it's off to the side. It's like we're not even seeing the whole thing. It's off to the side. So behind the character, it's very, very simple. This one just, has a crumpled piece of paper, so it's really just very simple texture, doesn't have a lot of details, so it also works as a background. This one here is actually kind of very misty, almost foggy looking. I think the student who did this did a lot of blurring, kind of selective blurring of the photograph, trying to really kind of make it simple, but you still see a little bit of detail, but it doesn't get in the way. This one is very kind of blurred in places, but there's these little raindrops that, give it a little detail, but still allow the character to stand out. This is just, in general, you want to have a photograph. This student actually went with a kind of a vectory background, and I thought it worked really well for a character. So I thought, hey, I think it's okay. It still has it gives it a lot of context for the character. But in general, you do want to work with a photograph. This one is probably the most detailed, um, and it works pretty well because the photograph itself is darker. Even though it has more detail, it's darker, and the character is kind of more saturated and a little lighter, so it stands out. So you kind of want to, again, it's like about playing with things, but you know, a lot of times like close-ups really work. Like you can see that a few of these are based on close-up backgrounds, like where we zoom in. So you want to create context in the sense of like a sense of space, you know, like the kind of the counter with the fruit, or you know, the kind of the sort of little rainy garden, or the paper for Garbage Dump Dan, or the you know, the grill, the stage. You want that sense of context, but think about how you can do it in the simplest way possible. Like maybe you just need like a little hint of something happening there, you know? So like a really big scene with a lot of detail, a lot going on won't work for your character. It's all about trying to figure out ways. Maybe again, maybe it's blurring, maybe it's close-ups, maybe it's just very sort of simple texture that somehow brings your character to life. Okay, okay, that's the main thing I wanted to talk about here, because I think I noticed when we look at everyone's projects, I think everybody's going to have to work on that a little bit, I think. And I'm not going to talk probably too much about text, maybe a little bit if we have some issues with legibility, but in general, I find that most folks do a really good job with the text. It's something that I think, you know, people really, you know, develop nice text treatments. So I think that's something that, yeah. And so, okay, that's what we're up to this week, is working on the background, working on the character, try to see if we can get that, you know, starting to get closer to being finished at the end of this week. So before we start looking at the character designs, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the task this week, in specific about layer styles. So I noticed that a lot of folks were missing one of the steps in the added steps in the assignment, you know, after you finish the textbook, and that was adding a layer style to your phrase. Okay, so let's just do that with this particular phrase right here, which already has a warp on it, which I think everybody got. So when you add a layer style, it's right down here, right below the layer panel. So let me just activate this. So right here is add a layer style. If you click on there, there's all kinds of different things you can do. Let's just, I don't know, let's just add a drop shadow here. It typically will open a big window here. I'm just going to select whatever's happening in here. So it has a very sort of subtle shadow. And notice how with a layer style will show you the layer style below the layer. So you can see, and you can actually turn these on or off here or here. So it's actually pretty great. You can also just delete them later too if you don't want to have them showing there at all, if you don't want to just have them turned off. So that's a layer style. So a layer style is just another way to non-destructively edit a layer. So we've also covered, excuse me. So we've also covered in here adjustment layers. This was our adjustment layer, if you remember that. So adjustment layers, they're actually pretty similar in a certain level. What they are is a non-destructive way. Now you don't have to do that for this assignment. I just wanted to quickly review. So here is, let's just, you know, do something different here. Let's just adjust the color here. Just remember, you always need to clip adjustment layers, otherwise they affect everything, right? So now we have, let's see if we can maybe do something a little bit more here. Let's desaturate that layer. It's text. It may not actually operate quite the same way as a layer. So it's added it, but it actually really hasn't changed it. So I think that it's, you know, the adjustment layers are not very good for text. They work a lot better for photographs. But in any case, that is the difference between an adjustment layer. Can you see how it sits on top and affects below, you know? And then the layer effect, which sits below. Okay, Amanda, so I love your text. I think it's very pretty and striking. I like the curve and also just the style. I think it fits your concept for Garden Glitter Grace. For the background, I think what you've done here by kind of really subduing the background is definitely in the right direction, because it makes your character stand out. One thing I noticed that you did, which is what I actually used to do a lot when I started in Photoshop, is I would do something let me just undo this here. I would reduce the opacity of a layer to subdue it. And that's actually, I mean, it's definitely going in the right direction in terms of trying to figure out how to make your background more subtle, like more subtle, so it doesn't overwhelm your character. You can see how just really that makes such a huge difference. What happens though is when you do that is you actually kind of fade the background. It looks kind of washed out, and that's sometimes not the best, or oftentimes it is not the best way to kind of bring life to your photograph. You want to subdue it, but you don't want to kind of drain the energy out of the design. So some of the ways to fix that, of course, is to have like a photograph that is already very sort of neutral. You know, it doesn't have a lot of color. You can also do things like add an adjustment layer. So let's just bring that opacity up. So we can play with it. There's sort of, in a way, you have to play with it. You can maybe add an adjustment layer here. Let's make sure to clip it, and you can maybe desaturate it, you know, so that the colors are not so bright that they compete with the character. But still, what's happening here is that because there's a lot of shrubbery and elements that are very similar to the character, no matter what we actually do with the background, tends to merge with it. Because, you know, this shrub, you know, this shrub, they all start becoming the same. You know, they blend as a clump. And so, you know, you can try something else you can try. I always like to recommend that you can start with this, is you take a section of your photograph, and if it's high resolution, you can do that. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it's just like, you of course you want to experiment with the placement, so I'm doing this very roughly, but you kind of just maybe take a little bit, like a close-up, and see if that works. I don't know if that quite works yet, but then, you know, you could maybe also blur, you know, a section of it. So to do that, you could go up to the filter layer. There's two different, if you go to the blur gallery, there's field blur and iris blur. Iris blur allows you to be a little bit more selective. I think I have video tutorials on both of those in this thread, but you could try, let's see here, let's just zoom in a little bit more. Hold on a second. Maybe we'll try, hold on a second here. So yeah, maybe we'll go to iris blur. And these little pins, what they allow you to do is where the pin is, you can adjust, you know, the blurring to get it, you know, how you want it. So like it can be, typically we want where the character is standing in real life would be in focus, and then behind it would be blurred. And why does that happen? It's just the way our eyes are. You know, if you focus on something, everything around it is blurred. So you can kind of play with it how much you want it to be blurred. I like extreme blurring, but you know, you can be more subtle. And you can see just in this preview, can you see how when you do that, suddenly the character, so much more of the character is brought forward when we blur the background out and we don't have those distractions. Okay, so where the character stands is typically, again, in focus. That's true of whether you're photographing something or with just your own eyes. And then the background is blurred, so it actually makes it look more realistic as well and have more depth. So you can give that a try. Or, you know, if you don't like any close-up sections of this particular photograph, you know, experiment. There's all kinds of different possibilities here. And ultimately what you're trying to really do here is just have a kind of a glimpse of the surrounding. You know, it can be, our mind fills in everything that is not seen. So if you have like a little bit of a, you know, close-up or a section of something, our mind will kind of fill in the rest. So we don't actually need to see an entire scene to understand the context of an environment. I hope that's making sense. Okay, I think that's all you really need to do here is work on your background, which is great place to be. Okay, Nelson, yeah, this text is really cool. I love the way you've sort of wrapped it around elements in the background, which is great. And I like the kind of the black and white. That's typically not what people do in this assignment, but why not? Create a black and white, entirely a black and white image. So I would say, your background, even though it is pretty simple, I think you could still make it even simpler. I'm a little bit concerned about what's happening here and here. Like, do we need that? Or maybe we just need to have a little bit of that stack of pancakes showing. So you could maybe play with this image or with another image. Stacks of pancakes I think are pretty easy to find. So you can kind of maybe just have it, just a little hint of it on the side. Maybe you could move your character over to the left a little bit so that you can, kind of play with that. But I think you're going in a good direction there. With your character, I think you're also going in a good direction here. I'd be inclined to make both of the arms the same, like you have the feet, because I think that's going to make your character look more alive. I might even, play with maybe making the torso a tiny bit bigger. Just again, it's all about trying to make your character really stand out, to really make it the forefront. So just make it a big, more visual weight, maybe adjust the head a little. It looks like the head is getting a little squashed down, so maybe play with the spacing there. Finally, so because you're working with black and white, typically in a design with color, what we can do is we can work with color to differentiate the background and the character. So like we can do things in the background, like we can desaturate it or cool it off or make it really dark or light, to kind of make it fade into the background, and so our character can pop, But when you're, you can use, warmer colors, and anyhow, you can do a lot of things with that. But with black and white, we're really only going to be able to use contrast to be able to make our character pop a little bit more, like really make it stand out. So you could experiment with an adjustment layer, so just like showing you how to do that here. So we can add, brightness and contrast is where we're going to go here, and we're just going to make sure it's clipped, and then you can just kind of increase that contrast here. You can also brighten it if you need to. I don't think we need to brighten it, but you could if you needed to. And there you see how much more now that's popping, and how substantial it looks. So you can, you could do that with, you can actually copy, well, you'd probably actually have to individually adjust this. I was going to say you can actually copy adjustment layers and move them. If you just hold down, if you click on the adjustment layer, hold down the Alt or Option key on your keyboard, whichever one you've got. You can actually, so I'm going to just pull this and drop it. And now I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key again and clip it. And now we've actually applied that same adjustment layer to the plate. You can see that now we've adjusted the contrast. Sometimes you have to go back and individually adjust them because your photographs will have different, different properties to them. But that can be a good way to kind of, quickly apply the same kind of qualities. Using the adjustment layers. Okay, I hope that's helped, and I think you're going in a good direction too. Just keep going. Okay, Troy, Garbage Dump Dan. Yeah, I love the concrete here. The text looks great. It's very kind of casual, but also kind of, it's got that kind of rough quality that I think works for Garbage Dump Dan. I would say too, the same thing for you is that your background's a little bit too busy. I think what happens when we're working on designs is we become so familiar with what's happening in a design that we actually can sort of visually compensate for elements in it. I do this all the time where I really need somebody to look at my work to kind of actually sort of, try to describe to me what they're actually seeing, so then I can adjust it and go, oh yeah, I can see how that, for somebody not familiar with the work, that would make sense. So your background, I love the idea of the concrete. So, you could do, this is always my first thing to try, is to see if I can find, a section in the photograph that could work, like to simplify it. Like maybe what I really like this concrete because I think that that's going to be a simple area, but it also is kind of rustic, So, I mean, of course you can do many other types of, there's lots of concrete images on the, in the internet. So, if you don't like this one, you can find something else. I'd probably expand it even more. I'd probably blur out this whole top here, just to kind of really, then your text will pop and, it'll really help. Your shadow looks really good. In terms of a character, I still think you could work a little bit more on bringing it to life through symmetry, which I've talked about. Like maybe you need two toothbrushes, like the same toothbrush forearms. Now just remember later on, or even now, with Puppet Warp, if you don't want them to have exactly the same bend, you can bend them with Puppet Warp. You can actually, change the angle so they look more unique. I would do the same thing with the legs, like maybe choose either the fork or the spoon. Again, even though I love both of these are beautiful, beautiful elements, but I think that would help you create more of that sense of character that you really want to bring to life. Okay, so that's what I would suggest to continue working on for this week. Okay, Elizabeth, yes, I love the idea of some kind of sound room or sound stage. Um, I would just try to find something simpler. Like if you go to Google Images and just type in like sound booth or recording studio, find something really empty. Also a professional photograph. I think when you do a search on something like that, you're going to find a lot of kind of amateur photographs. So you kind of want to find something real snazzy and glamorous, that you can put behind there. And by glamorous, I just mean something professionally photographed. So do another like Google image search on that, see what you can find. The shadow looks really great. And your character, I think, design is really coming along, but you do want to make sure to have those layer masks in place. That's really important. In fact, I would suggest before you do anything else with this character to go in there and bring those layer masks in. Use the tutorial from Milestone 3 Task 2 and just follow along so that you get that in place before anything else. I think your text looks really good, but I would watch using a kind of a clipping mask with multiple colors. See if you can find something with just one or two colors in it, and you can always change it later. But why not use something in the color harmony of what you've got? Like you've got warm colors, or you've got kind of grays, mostly silvers and grays and blacks, and a touch of red. Maybe harmonize it with that. Okay. Maybe make your character a little bit bigger too. Just kind of bring it up a little bit more. Again, you want your character to really be center stage. All right. Okay. Keep going with this, and again, focus on layer masks. Okay, Alexandria. Well, I actually think that your text is looking really, really, really good. It's very easy to see. I mean, you can always keep experimenting with it, but for right now, I think it looks good. And the only thing I would say is maybe it's a little bit tight up at the top. You could maybe move the placement, but that's so easy. Maybe move your head down a little bit. I think your character is looking good. Somehow this leaf doesn't seem quite right yet. Is it too big? Is that what it is? Maybe we could try making it a little smaller. Like it's the reason why I say that it's kind of like we've got this sort of beauty. You created a really beautiful torso with all of these beautiful flower petals, and then you're kind of covering it with something which isn't, as nice. Maybe I might experiment with that. Maybe do you even need this particular element? Maybe you do. I think why did you have this? I think well, I don't know. That looks kind of nice, doesn't it? Okay, maybe you don't need that. Maybe you could move down a little bit, I think that's pretty nice. See what you think, but anyhow. Okay, your background. Yeah, so with your background, I tend to think that when you're working on a background, we're doing all these kind of collages and montaging techniques on the character, and I feel like with the background, keep it simple, because there's a lot of, you have like a sky and a ground. See if you can find an image maybe that has both of those properties in them, so you don't have to whittle them together. Even that looks, I think, a little bit better, although the background is I think it's a little bit intense, and I'm a little bit concerned that it's got so much of this kind of vectory stuff. Like it's actually, this is not a photograph of the sky, this is somebody's rendition of the sky, and it'd be great if you could just, use a photograph. In fact, I think I may have something. If you go to Google Images, do a search for a larger image, you could come up with something like, let's see what we got here, night sky. This is probably not exactly what you're looking for, but, something with a sky and a ground. Do you know what I mean? Let's just copy this into your image here. This is a really big image. Look at the pixel size of that. It's crazy. So you can kind of move it around, or whatever you want. And again, this is probably not maybe the image you're interested in, but you can see sort of now how that's a little bit more Looks like she's still a little bit too floating there, but now these kind of go together, and then now you can maybe it's still a little bit busy in the background, so maybe you could blur a little bit up here so you don't have so many stars showing, or maybe you could desaturate the background a little bit, so that it's not so intense. When you desaturate something, you're always taking a little bit of the focus on it. So, you can just try by, sometimes doing that. I'm not saying this is the image you're using, but you can sort of play with it so that, again, so your character pops. Okay, so I might try that. Or if you don't like the idea of, the night sky anymore, maybe just a sky. I think it probably doesn't, maybe if you get the right kind of sky, maybe it doesn't even need to have a ground. Do you know what I mean? Like maybe she just, um, this isn't big enough, but maybe she just floats in the sky. All right. Okay, well keep going. I think you're going in a good direction here. Okay, Gabriel, I love this background with the sewer. I think this is a great choice. It'll work really well with your character. I would just say that maybe there's a little bit too much detail in this area behind your character. You don't need a lot of detail. You just maybe need this element here. Maybe you could even have a little bit at the top because there's nothing going. Anywhere where your character is not is not, that's where you can often have more detail. But then behind your character is really where you want it to fade away. So maybe you could blur this section in here. Again, you can check out more of my tutorials about selective blurring, but that's probably what I would aim for here. And the cast shadow, rather than using, I think you have some sort of individual shadows here of the different elements. Right now, they're not really being cast on anything. They're kind of being cast into the air. So I would take these off, just remove these, and do the cast shadow technique that's in the directions this week. I know you did these before we worked on that, and then use a cast shadow with using that technique, and that way you can actually cast it onto the ground. Your text, I like the idea of the double text. At this point, I think that it's a little hard to read. Um, I think you could keep either one of these, but maybe change the color, like maybe make it a little lighter. Like what you could even just go for white at this point. See how it goes. Like once you work on the background a little bit more, a lot of times the simpler your background is, the more complex your text can be, and vice versa. So right now I think your text is too complex for your background, and so I'd experiment with that a little bit more. Okay, all right, I think you're going in a good direction here. I love the kind of um, underground environment, the rusty environment. Okay, Jolene, yeah, I love the idea of the paper shredding. I think that's a great idea. I would say that, what you could do here is either, like, I would go and really substantially blur out a lot at the top, just blur it all the way down to here if you can. And let's just do that again, just to show people. So there's different methods to selectively blur. I always like to just duplicate the layer just so that I've got a copy because this is destructive. There's ways to make it non-destructive, but then I don't like, I find that it's a little harder to see what I'm doing, so I just end up copying it. So, well, let's try a field blur. So the field blur, let's just move this down here, and I'm going to unblur it here. I never seem to know exactly how to work with the field blur, to be honest. I end up using the iris blur more often because I always seem to get stuck. Let's go to the iris blur. That's with the pinpoints. So let's just unblur the whole thing. So now it's unblurred, and now we can go and just kind of pinpoint places where we want things to be blurred. So that's weird. I think I must have changed the settings in here. Okay. Yeah, I think well, I'm going to say I'm going to say it's user error. I think it's my fault because I think I haven't been doing the blur for a while and I'm a little bit rusty. So let's go back to field blur again. It's usually the easier one to work with. Okay, there we go. I think I'm back. There we go. So I'm just going to put in some pinpoints here. Apologize for that. It's a little embarrassing when you don't know how to do something. It's not, again, not something I use very often. Okay, so now what I've done is I've sort of blurred the top because I don't need to see all this. I just need maybe the paper at the bottom, you know, to show. I can move this up a little bit. I'm kind of inclined to always go really extreme with blurring. So you could try something like that. And it's going to take forever to adjust. Something else you could try too is making this a little larger so you don't see so many, like the image, the background image, so you don't see so many little details in here. Like you know, you'd see a kind of a chunkier pieces of paper. That can also help too, in addition to the blur. So you might give that a try. Your character looks good. Yeah, you know, I think that I kind of liked your character before, but why don't you keep these for now? It's always something that you can, you know, play with later on. You know, these elements. But I do think your character felt fairly complete before. Um, you see how now suddenly our character, just in doing that, suddenly now everything above here is all in focus. Okay, the last thing I wanted to mention too is that your text, I think your text is good. I like the chunkiness of it. It's just that it's getting lost on, so can you see how now we put it up there and wow, we can see it? So this is also, by blurring the top, we can also now put the text up here and it's a lot stronger. You can also just kind of now pull your character down a little bit so that we're not covering the text with, pardon me, the banana peel with the text. I don't think I have this font, but you could make it even a little bit bigger. You know, you could go bigger with this text, and you know, like even you know, could pull it down vertically a little bit. Let's see here. I don't think it's, well, yeah, okay. You know, like I'm sort of, typically we don't necessarily want to stretch fonts like some, but if you really like a font, sometimes you can get a chunkier look to it by doing something like that. I don't know if I quite like it so long, but you know what I mean? Because otherwise, if I made it bigger, it would stretch off of the canvas, which is something that you may have experimented with already. Okay, so all right, I think you're going in a good direction here. Just keep going and experimenting and you know, evolving with your design. Okay, Austin. Yeah, I love the idea of your bird sitting on a bowl. That's very cute. And I think your bird looks really cute too with the little feet. You know, I think they look really nice. Your text looks great. I would just say that, and your background, I think you're making some good moves here. But what's happening here is I think because your character has so many light colors, it's getting a little lost on the background here because it's also light. If you can find like a black granite, sort of a dark countertop, I think that'd be great. And you know, maybe a dark bowl. And I would make your character bigger. Like maybe we could take our text, you know, move our text, you know, up here. I'm not moving the image, but you get the idea. Move it up here, you know, move your bowl. You know, you may change things, but so you kind of move everything and make your character bigger. You know, if you whatever. So like I think you should use, like, change maybe this to something darker. There's lots of dark countertops on the internet, and that would really, I think that would really set off your character beautifully. And then, you know, with this particular one, I think you're probably going to change this one. But you know, with this one, we don't actually need to see this part of the background photograph, like all of the stuff back here. We just need the countertop to get an idea that we're in a kitchen. So you could blur all that out if you were to use this photograph, just saying. Okay, so that's what I'd work on a little bit more. Just, you know, think about setting off your character, maybe a little more contrast, a little more simplicity, making it a little bit bigger. Okay, Margaret, you know, it's interesting what I noticed about your design is that there's so much kind of light and infusion, glitter, light, translucency, that I think that it's something to, you know, it's a part of your design and you can kind of keep playing with it with your design. So the background, I like the background. I love the fog. I love the lights. I think this particular photograph may not work the best for your image just because there's a lot of detail. I thought, well, maybe if we take this photograph, let's pull it down a little bit and sort of, and make it bigger so that your character is not, surrounded by so much conflicting or busy kinds of, busy kinds of visuals, even though the arms are really beautiful. But then I noticed that she was just kind of floating. So maybe that wasn't a good idea. But then, if you go to, like, just Google images and let's type in empty stage light fog and go to Google Images, maybe we can find something that could do what yours is doing, but in a little simpler way, using your idea. And there's actually, ooh, look how beautiful that is. So beautiful. There's some beautiful images here. Maybe you wouldn't use the whole thing, but maybe like the centerpiece, or, so there's actually quite a lot of, that's really beautiful. It has like watermarks on it, but look how cool that is. That foggy, beautiful look that you're going to. So, ooh, that's a cool one too, isn't it? So you've got lots of wonderful choices there. So I would use one, maybe experiment with some of those. Then also, think about your text too. I like this text. I think I like the curve of it. It's a little bit lost here because it's almost the same like value as the background. They're the same value. So whatever choice you end up with the background, just make sure that there's contrast with your text. So if you have a dark background, you should have light text. If you have a light background, then a darker text, so it stands out. I think your character design is coming along. I'm a little bothered by the yarn. It doesn't seem like it quite suits your character. It seems a little droopy. So maybe experiment. Maybe if you want some hair, maybe actually a wig, like some kind of really cool, like kind of wig with maybe with a lot of movement or something like that. That could be a really cool image. Given that rocker chick kind of look that I think your character seems to be heading towards. I love the rest of the elements here. The arms still, they don't seem quite right yet. Maybe experiment with something else with a little more visual weight. Yeah, okay, keep going. I think you're definitely making some good choices here and sort of developing a nice aesthetic, which is really one of the things that we're trying to do, is kind of create the character of the character. Okay, Nilda, let's see here. Okay, so in your character design, yeah, I like this text. I think is really cool. I like the stroke around it. It's a little small. I don't think I have this text. Do I? Let's see. Here it is. Is this it? Hold on a second here. Oops. Oh, I just created another layer here. Oh, I see. Oh, okay. So this isn't text anymore. So, I'd make this a bit bigger. Really make it stand out a little bit more. And just keep in mind that it would be Flippin' Food Fran. That's the name of the character. So you just want to replace that text with that. Make it bigger. Maybe it will just be in a single line of text, sentence. For your background, I'd keep looking for a background. There's a lot of detail around here, all of these elements that you'd probably want to you don't want so much happening. But I like the idea of a placemat or an empty table, but keep searching, maybe do some Google image searching. I'd also think about, more of a professional photograph. Like by professional, I just mean it, somebody who really knows how to take a photograph will make it look really beautiful. It'll be very kind of good lighting, good framing, good composition. This one looks like something that maybe is sort of more of a snapshot that somebody without photographic training took. So the better quality your photographs are, the better your design will be automatically. So let's just take that out for the moment. And with your character design, I think, let's just look at your cinnamon roll here. So with your cinnamon roll, I noticed, oh yeah, you've got like, can you see there's a watermark on here? What that means typically is that it's a low resolution image. watermarks, because those are just kind of previews that you get from the websites. And it looks like it's also maybe gotten a little squished, you know, where, you know, when we think of a cinnamon roll, we're sort of more thinking, hey, that's the way it should probably be. And that's actually now the text looks more correct as well. So watch when you resize something, you want to make sure that you hold down the shift key as you resize it. So I'm going to, you know, transform here, Control T or Controller Command key T, and then when I hold the shift key, I'm holding the shift key. Can you see how it hangs together? It doesn't squish. If you don't hold the shift key, you can do this kind of thing, and then, you know, it's so easy to lose your image. So let me just go back here. So maybe, I don't know if you thought about this, but maybe one cinnamon roll rather than two, you know? It seems like that the body, it might work more as a body to just have one. I'd also maybe work with your bananas, like to kind of rotate them to give them more of that sense of an arm. You know, maybe they should be a little bit bigger as well. That's a little bit too big, but you know, to kind of start being a little bit more like arms. With your legs, I would choose either the bacon or the sausage and duplicate them so you have the same type of leg. Okay. Okay, so that's what I'd keep working on, is just experiment with your character, make sure you have good quality photographs, and experiment with your text and your background a little bit more.